All right, I'm here to share some thoughts, and they really are just thoughts on Proud Family, Louder and Prouder. So that's the reboot they're doing. They're doing a full reboot. It's at least set for one whole season, but they're releasing it one episode at a time. I think they premiered with 2 episodes, and since then it's an episode a week. So at the time of my watching, there were 4 episodes out. Watched all 4 pretty quickly, and yeah, I want to share just impressions. Obviously, I mean, this would never be a full review. I don't really do much of that. But even if the whole season was out and I had watched it, I don't think I would do a full review. But here, honestly, yeah, can't judge the whole thing. Just a handful of episodes, and there's a lot to say. There's a lot to get into. I'll try to keep this relatively pared down, and as I'll get to soon enough, there are just some aspects of the discourse surrounding the show that I'm just not going to touch because I'm not qualified. It's not stuff that I can really comment on. So for the most part, I will be focusing on the visuals of the reboot here because they do differ quite a bit from the original show. And then I'll talk about some of the writing of the new season so far and some of the new characters and just some more contemporary elements that they've brought to the table as part of this reboot, which comes quite a while after, right? Like close to 20 full years since the original handful of seasons of the show. And as for me and my history with the original show, I was never dedicated to it. Like I never watched it religiously. I wasn't a big Disney Channel kid in general, so I would just catch episodes of those shows here and there. I don't think I've watched every episode of the original series, but I've seen enough of it. I had positive feelings about the show as a kid watching it. I thought it was fine, but I'm definitely not a super fan. There is quite a large dedicated audience out there for the Proud Family, I will say, and that audience, at least based on what I've seen online, definitely has some strong feelings, varied feelings, but strong feelings about this reboot, which brings into question like the nature of reboots, what makes a successful reboot, what different people actually want from a reboot, all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I'll briefly touch on some of the initial reactions we've gotten here around the net, around the web, and then we'll move on to talking about some really solid, surface level elements of the show itself. Okay, so I looked into this on one of the recent live streams. I was just cruising around IMDb reviews for Louder and Prouder. I hadn't seen the Rotten Tomatoes at the time, but yeah, I saw the reviews on IMDb, which are generally very mixed. I think it's at a 6 out of 10 on there, and it also happens to be a 60% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, so that's kind of funny how it lines up, even though there are barely any reviews on either site. So if you really want to put your 2 cents in and have it make an impact, go ahead, because it's really, there are a few hundred, I think, on IMDb, and then Rotten Tomatoes, there's like 10 audience reviews or something, and like 5 critic reviews from relatively small outlets. So it's not like we have a consensus, but I will put up some images here that I captured online. So obviously there's a disconnect between the critic score and the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. I don't find that too surprising, and the comments, the excerpts from the critic reviews that I saw, I generally agree with. There are a few criticisms that I sort of agree with as well, but not most of them. And then over here on IMDb, this is actually neat, by the way. I didn't know that IMDb provides you with such like detailed breakdowns of the reviews, including demographics, which is fascinating to me. And it would be extremely useful if more people reviewed stuff on IMDb, honestly. But as it is, it's just kind of a vague idea of how the existing audience of the show feels about the new show. And I do get the sense that the majority of the reviews that I'm seeing on IMDb are people who were big fans of the original and who have very strong opinions about it, people who are full-grown adults at this point. What are some of the common criticisms here? Okay, plenty of people don't seem to like the new theme song. That's that. Honestly, I'm okay with the new theme song, at least on the production side. Ooh, especially if you're listening into headphones compared to the original one. Ooh, it's crisp. Ooh, you get that stereo separation between the different instruments and stuff. It's actually quite nice. But in terms of songwriting, whatever, vocals, I mean, subjective. Go ahead and argue about that. That's fine. So we have some pretty consistent criticisms of stereotypes present in Louder and Prouder, stereotypical representation, basically. And colorism is the big one that's being brought up a lot. In fact, there's a petition. Of course, there's a petition on change.org that says, hey, we need to like cancel the show. It's not clear from the wording or the use here whether they mean like cancel the production of the show or like culturally cancel it so nobody likes it anymore. But either way, it has like close to 20,000 signatures. Like that's a pretty big deal. That's that's not some crazy person just putting out a petition about something very specific and it gets like one or two things. No, this is a real thing. It's a genuine concern. And as I alluded to earlier, this is not a point that I can really get into in any real detail. It's not something for me to talk about. Ask other people on the internet. They will give you well-informed opinions. They will probably explain those opinions eloquently, but it is there. I want to mention that. I want to make people aware that criticism is prominent. It's there. And also, sort of on the other end of a very different area of critique is people upset about the show's perceived wokeness and perceived broad appeal. It's a huge topic, but in general, some people get really upset at the idea of a show trying too hard to be quote-unquote woke, and that being to the detriment of the quality of that piece of media. I've definitely talked about this before. Plenty of other people have talked about this before. It's a giant thing with Disney where they do fail quite a bit at like attempting to be progressive and have, all this positive representation, but it's done in a really clumsy way, or it's not done effectively, or just the cynical motivations behind that representation are so clear that it's questionable whether it's actually doing any good, and you question their motives. Here, in terms of wokeness, I guess gayness, I guess LGBTQA plus identity is maybe what people are actually referring to here, because they're not usually specific enough to say which part of the perceived wokeness is like an issue. You know what I mean? But I have to assume, just from the episodes that we've gotten so far, that it's just gay characters who are not heterosexual. Michael is out gay. You could make an argument that there's some stereotypes happening there, but again, not really my field. Outside of that, we have the fourth episode, I believe, which is at the time of recording, it's the most recent release, is the episode where everybody finds out that these two new characters that have been bopping around, they have two dads, and it's a big issue, right? Like, once the word gets out, they're made fun of, they're not treated well, no one's willing to like stand up for them, no one's willing to hang out with them. And it was kind of interesting because watching that episode, I wondered for a minute, I felt like, okay, this almost feels a little bit outdated just in terms of how, people react to two characters being gay, right? I was like, oh, is this maybe from the perspective of 20 or so years ago when it was a very different landscape in terms of cultural acceptance? That's not really the case. I had to think about it a little more. My initial impression was just off, because really the issue here is not that the characters, the town, the NPCs in the background, it's not that they're upset that there are gay people around. I think it's specifically the aspect of like two men as parents, two male partners functioning as parents and as just as members of the community. And that is a very different topic. But I do get the impression that it's generally harder for, the world at large to accept LGBTQA plus people in parental roles than just the fact that they're in a relationship. Do you know what I mean? Again, it's not something that I'm really qualified to dig into, but I do think that's a different angle. Like, that's a different aspect of working towards like acceptance and even tolerance. From that perspective, I was like, no, this actually isn't outdated. This is genuinely still an issue. I don't know if that's the kind of stuff that people are referring to in their angry reviews of the show. Outside of that, I don't see it. I don't see the overreaching wokeness that people are apparently referring to and seeing in the show. It feels natural enough. And in fact, this is something I'll get to later when I talk about the writing, but like, the show goes right back to business. This isn't like plenty of other reboots where they make it feel like an event and they try to, address the fact that like, oh, we've been away for so long and now we're coming back to business. No, it just jumps right back into the action and just starts feeling like the original show pretty darn quickly. And at first that kind of threw me off because I felt like the pacing was so fast, my head was spinning. But I think it ultimately works because it's acting like nothing has changed in terms of what the show is. It's obviously incorporating new contemporary elements, new ingredients, but our characters are essentially the same. They're just a little bit older, and they're dealing with completely contemporary issues. So honestly, I don't necessarily agree with criticism of like the perceived try-hard progressiveness of Louder and Prouder. I don't get it. I could be convinced, I guess, if someone wants to make a great case, but so far I have not seen a great case for all this perceived wokeness getting in the way of the show or detracting from quality. Anyway, that's just an overview of some of the reactions and discourse I've seen on the show so far. But now it's time. I need to talk about the show itself. Starting out with the visuals, and it does look quite different visually, and I like it for the most part. I like the different look. Colors, wonderful. Details, much more prominent in the background. Backgrounds are just much more elaborate in general. Yeah, even just what we see on characters, how characters are shown, not so much movement, but just visual design and shading and such. I would liken this, the design overhaul here, the art direction overhaul, which it's not that drastic, but still, it is pretty significant. And I would liken it to sort of a video game remaster. I'm sure you folks out there who play games are familiar with that, where like they take an old game, they're not building it up again from scratch, but they are updating different aspects. They make HD character models, higher poly character models, new lighting, new physics engines, stuff like that. It's getting a redux, it's getting improved for the most part, and here especially lighting and shading on her characters is very different. It definitely gives everything a more pronounced sense of depth that I actually quite enjoyed. Now again, I wasn't a super fan of the original show. I could see myself being annoyed by the slightly new look, but at the same time, like we said, it's been roughly 20 years. It would feel strange to not come at this with some kind of new flavor, visually speaking. Overall, I like how the show looks. And it's also genuinely weird. I'll get into this more when we talk about the writing of the show. But there's some weird stuff. You have some very exaggerated visual moments, montages, just cartoony exaggerations of characters. Environments will peel away and take you to some weird surreal space. It's genuinely a weird show, and I really like that about it. I had a great time just inhabiting this world, even the street where apparently everyone lives on now. I don't know if this matches up with the original show or not, but like it's so steep. I don't know if it's supposed to be a reference to like Baxter Street out here in LA. I mean, I know it's based in LA, the show itself, but like, oh my gosh, Baxter Street is the worst. I used to drive stick shift, right? And Google Maps would always try to take me over Baxter Street when I lived out in Echo Park. Can't do it. You can't do it. It is so steep. And this was also just like a junky car. So what happened one time is I was almost at the crest of the hill before you have to go down just as steep a hill and hopefully your brakes work. I was almost at the top, but there was a car in front of me that was taking its sweet old time to get over the top. I didn't have enough momentum to actually make it to the top. The tires didn't have enough grip. I started sliding backwards and I was like, I'm good. If there was a car behind me, this would be a really bad situation. So oh my gosh, I avoid it like the plague, those streets over there. Anyway, do I have anything else to say about the visuals? I mean, in general, I will say that, and this includes the original series, this show has always had some really bold visual choices. I mean, just like the Gross Sisters alone, that's pretty weird. That's pretty weird for an animated kid show, but it works so well, and it doesn't take long at all to just kind of get used to those elements. I mean, it's got style. Like that's something that I'm looking for so often, especially in children's animated entertainment. Just style and creativity and ideas. It actually has this really solid and unique visual identity, and I love that. And at least in my opinion, it has been expanded here in the reboot to a really satisfying degree. Writing. Okay, so I already mentioned how like just from episode 1, they jump right back in. All of our characters are there. I think at least the main cast, everybody is the same voice actor, right? Which is an impressive feat on its own. Everyone sounds great. Like sometimes in reboots, you'll hear certain voice actors kind of age up and it can kind of take you out of the experience. I didn't get that here. I didn't notice anybody sounding off character. It all worked pretty well. Like we already said, I mean, yeah, more contemporary subject matter overall. Social media is a big thing. They have an entire episode about like canceling social media influencers and stuff, which is pretty well done. I think it's one of the better takes I've seen on like influencers canceling and just like the power power creep that comes from being an influencer. That's ultimately what it's about, is like abuse of power. And I'm not saying that everyone who gets canceled is actually a great person. No, of course not. But at the same time, yeah, we're talking about a deficit of power. And when you have any of those situations, there's always a possibility for abuse. Basically, there's a possibility to use that power for really awful goals, awful ends. So I thought that was done fairly well. Well, I mean, overall, I think the writing is genuinely funny most of the time. Even just some of like the sight gags they'll have around. There's one. Oscar's reading the newspaper, and the big front page article, the headline just says, "Where is the economy?" And maybe that was meant to be like, where does the economy stand right now? I just took it as like, where is the economy? And I was just cracking up. I feel like that summarizes a lot, and it also summarizes my understanding of economics, so I really appreciated that. I don't know, Oscar in general, he's got some great lines, and some of them are really quick, and probably more so for the adults in the room. We're familiar with that kind of stuff in children's animation. But in here in particular, there's a part where Penny's yelling at him, and Oscar goes, "What did I do, Mama? I mean, baby." That's really good. That's really good. There's some meat on that one, you know. That's for the grown-ups, I think. Trudy's not around a whole lot, at least so far. She's there sometimes, which is Oscar's very prominent. I guess he always has been. As for the kids themselves, I mean, the dialogue is A-okay. We don't get a ton with the original friend group. They're generally around, but so far, none of them have really been the focus of an episode, to my memory. At least so far, we've been getting tons of stuff revolving around some of our new characters, and in particular, Maya is definitely a very prominent character so far, and I haven't seen any specific mentions of Maya and how people feel about her in their reviews and stuff. Personally, I like Maya. I think Maya presents an opportunity to do some really interesting things, to talk about extremely contemporary subject matter, and also just this idea of, okay, they're high school, right? They're older than they were in the original show. Maya is indicative of maturing of their age group in general, right? Like, as they grow up, they become more and more aware of just like actual world issues. Maya is just outright an activist, but great presence. I don't know. Great presence on the show. Personality is just something very different. She's not a bully, more so that she just she doesn't take She knows what she wants. She knows what she's about. And I also just like the fact that she's part of her character is just she always has a book. And at least for all the ones that I've noticed so far, I'm pretty sure all of them are real books, which I really, really appreciate because that's a much more subtle way of recommending really timely, text, literature, whatever, to a massive viewing audience, as opposed to one of those featurettes where they're like, here, 10 books we think you should read. No, this feels very natural. It's subtle. There are only a couple of moments where they point out specific authors or titles with dialogue. And best of all, perhaps about Maya, and I was worried that they wouldn't take it in this direction when we first saw her, is that she's actually flawed. Like, she's not just some Mary Sue who represents the strength of your beliefs and working towards a better future. No, she's also flawed. She's, genuinely stubborn. She's also pretty impulsive, relatively speaking. She wants to do good, but she doesn't always know how to accomplish that effectively. And yeah, that first episode, I guess this is a spoiler. She and Penny are arguing. They're trying to bust an animal out of the zoo. And Penny has to be the one that's like, okay, look, I get it. You're trying to do something good. Now that we know the specifics of the situation, what you were trying to do doesn't actually line up. This actually probably isn't a good thing, or it's not a good way to do it, so maybe it's time to reassess, take a step back. So far, I think that's a really interesting addition to have to the main cast. She's definitely part of the main cast. She's around quite a bit, even though she's not necessarily buddy-buddy with all of our main characters. And overall, kind of wrapping up the section on the writing stuff here, I get the impression, it's certainly a very subjective personal impression, but I do get the impression that this show, the original was certainly, and the reboot seems as as well to just be pretty darn accessible. It's obviously something different. It's something unique. We talked about that already. But like, as we also said, it's funny. It's entertaining. The visuals are quite nice. It looks completely modern. I would even say that it's one of the better looking animated shows on Disney or Netflix or any of the major streaming services right now. It looks darn good. I guess overall, I have faith in the team behind this show. I've never met them, but just based on what I've seen so far, and it is only a fraction of the whole new season that we're gonna get. So who knows? It could change, but I genuinely get the impression that it's a really savvy team, like a team who really knows what it's doing, what they're trying to accomplish, and how to be entertaining while doing all of that. At least that's my feeling on it. Clearly some other people are just not happy with the new direction, but at least from... Oh, are you okay? Oh, you had a nightmare? In general, I get the sense that some of that negative reaction is very legitimate concerns about representation on the show, about changes to the show that maybe aren't so helpful, but I also think some of it is coming from a place of, we didn't want a reboot to begin with, you know, they don't want them to change too much about the show, they have something here from their past that they already love so much. There's always going to be a risk of upsetting people, there's always going to be a risk of introducing any kind of change to something that people already love, so who knows? I certainly don't know. I'm not the person who knows things. You can share things with me. You can tell me things. You can tell me thoughts and opinions about the Proud Family Louder and Prouder. Should I ask other people about the show? Do you think it's going to change its trajectory a whole lot through the rest of the season or mostly stay the same? Tell me all of this stuff and we'll be good to go. I'm done and I'll begin editing the audio and then editing the video and buying more notebooks. Thanks for stopping by.